Merhabalar, ikinize öncelikle hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Bugünün konuğu Harvard Üniversitesinden Deniz Satık bizi kırmadı geldi. Kendisine de ayrıca teşekkür ediyorum. Ben bir kısaca tanıtacağım sizi önce. Ondan sonra siz sunumunuzu yaparsınız. Deniz, University of Massachusetts Amherst'te felsefe okumuş bachelor's için. Sonra da Syracuse Üniversitesi'nde dil bilim yüksek lisans programından mezun olmuş. Şu anda da Harvard Üniversitesi'nde yine dil bilim doktorası yapıyor ve devam ediyor şu an çalışmalarına. Ana çalışma alanları söz dizim, anlam bilim ve bunların ara kesiti. Aynı zamanda Harvard'da yine Teaching Fellow, öğretim asistanlığı ve instructor olarak da dersler veriyor. Çok uzatmak istemiyorum. Kendisine de geldiği için teşekkür ediyoruz. Bir de clarification tarzı hani sunumun akışı sırasında böyle kısa sorulabilecek açıklama tarzı sorular için sunumu bölüp sorabiliriz. Ama böyle daha detaylı, daha uzun cevaplar gerektiren sorular olursa da onları da en sonda alalım diye konuştuk. Ben daha da uzatmadan Deniz'e bırakıyorum sahneyi.
Teşekkürler. So this talk is unfortunately going to be in English because I'm nowhere near comfortable enough to keep presenting in Turkish.
It's totally okay. Fine.
Yeah, I hope that's okay with everyone. So the topic for today is going to be the genitive case, which I believe is called genitive durumu, or there was another word, I forgot what it was.
Tamlayan, we can also say
Tamlayan.
tamlayan or genitive.
Great. And an agreement asymmetries in the Turkic languages. So not just Turkish. This is a survey on the Turkic languages more, like 5 or 6 languages, Turkic languages or so. So the genitive case is a case on nouns that is often used to show possession. So in a possessive phrase like my cat, my in English is the form of the first person pronoun, which has genitive case on it. So in a possessive phrase like my cat, the my is the possessor of the cat. The thing that is possessed is called the possessum, and that is the cat. Now, what I am interested in this talk is the relationship between the genitive case right here and the agreement that is on the possessum. So this seems confusing because there's no agreement on the possessum, at least in English, right? Fortunately, we are all Turkish speakers here, at least I would hope we are. And we can see that we will be able to see agreement on the possessum, the possessed thing in Turkish shortly. But I want to just point out first that since at least Chomsky 2000, it's often been assumed that agreement is what is assigned case in the narrow syntax. In other words, that agreement conditions case. So whatever agreement is on this guy is going to assign genitive case to this, the possessor, via the operation agree. And I think that in Turkish, that's the uyuşum. So now, moving on to Turkish. The Turkic languages are well known for having agreement with on possessums or agreement with possessors. So for example, 2 and 3, we see that the 5 features of the possessor almost always, keyword almost, so keep that in mind, match up with the 5 features of the possessive suffix. So there's agreement on the possessum, the possessed thing, And according to Chomsky and his followers, this is what is responsible for assigning the genitive case on the possessor. And what is crucial here is that the 5 features of the possessor match up with the 5 features on would match up with the 5 features of the agreement suffix. So in kedim, the kedim has first person singular agreement, has and that matches up perfectly with the agreement with the 5 features of the possessor. Unfortunately, that's not always going to be the case. But in 3, we see the same thing. So we see the third person singular suffix here, and the possessor is also has third person singular possessive features. So third person singular 5 features. Now, as I said, for Chomsky and his followers, this agreement here is what is responsible for assigning genitive case. It is the genitive case marking is parasitic on agreements. You can't have the genitive case marking without the agreement. But there is one more logical way in which you could construe what they're saying. Couldn't it just be the case that case itself determines agreement? No pun intended. It could just be, what if this guy, this genitive case marking, is responsible for assigning this agreement onto the head noun? Why is it in this order? So this is the question that I'll be investigating in this talk. Which comes first? So is it the genitive case that comes first? Or is it the agreement that comes first? Is it the genitive case that's parasitic on agreement? Or is it the agreement that's parasitic on the genitive case? So in English, we have a saying, which came first, the chicken or the egg? That's basically what I like to look more into in detail in this talk. So I want to argue that it's the genitive case that this agreement that is parasitic on the genitive case, not the other way around, as Chomsky and his followers have claimed. So the goal of this presentation is to determine when and how genitive case is assigned. Is genitive case assigned by agreement, or is it the other way around? I want to say that it is the other way around. The agreement is parasitic on the case marking, the genitive case marking. So based on evidence from many Turkic languages, I argue that genitive case assignment in Turkic is an unmarked case that is assigned before agreement, in agreement with Balbelik, 2008, no pun intended again. So case is not assigned via agreement, contra Chomsky and many others. At least in the cases of genitive case and non-nominative case in Turkic, which I'll talk about here. So the data is from several Turkish speakers, including myself. In-person fieldwork from 1 native Saha speaker, online fieldwork from 3 native Uzbek and Altai speakers and 1 Kyrgyz speaker. So here's an introduction into Baker's work. So Baker and Vinokurova 2010 and Baker 2015 provide an account of genitive case assignment in Saha, in which genitive and nominative case are assigned by agreement following Chomsky. So their evidence is as follows. So this is some of their evidence. A possessive suffix has the same 5 features as a possessor. So in each of these cases, the 5 features of the possessive suffix, the agreement suffix, it always matches up with the features of the possessor. So like benim kedim, my cat, bizim kedimiz, our cat, and so on and so forth. They take this to indicate that it's agreement that assigns case, a genitive case. But as I mentioned before, this doesn't have to logically be the case. It could be that the presence of genitive case is what allows agreement to take place. And this has been mentioned by many people in the past literature who treat agreement as a post-syntactic operation. So more like a phonological thing where agreement might inspect all nominals and agree with ones with the appropriate case assignment. That's one alternative that could be the case. So these approaches assume a configurational mechanism to assign case markings based on Marant's 1991 who distinguishes between 4 kinds of case. So the order of case assignment is from top to bottom. So first you're assigning lexical case and then the other stuff. So the lexical case is case determined by the lexical properties of an item, such as quirky case assigning verbs in Icelandic. So I can probably give you guys an example of this in Turkish too. So like benim evimin içinde. So the postposition içinde, I take to assign a lexical genitive case to ev, leading to evimin. But we're not really interested in lexical or dependent case or default case really in this talk, but I'll briefly mention them today, right now. So the dependent case is case that is assigned depending on whether there are other nominals in the same local domain, such as accusative or ergative. So like, in a sentence like, Deniz tavuk döneri yedi. The accusative case on tavuk döneri would be assigned just because by virtue of where the position it is in the syntactic tree. So because there's a subject, because there is a subject present, and because tavuk döneri is an object, it would be assigned an accusative case with no reference to agreement, by the way. So an unmarked case, this is the most important concept for this talk. This is what I'm going to argue is what assigns genitive case in the Turkic languages. So it's the kind of case that is assigned for example, to any NP in a clause. So nominative, for example, if any NP that isn't assigned lexical case or dependent case in a clause, it's going to be assigned nominative case. And similarly, any NP in a genitive construction, sorry, any NP in a NP that isn't already assigned lexical or dependent case is going to be assigned an unmarked case. So it's going to be assigned genitive to any NP in an NP. And default case is just assigned to any NP not marked for case. This isn't too important, but there's one part of the talk where it might be relevant. And we'll talk about this in a minute. The Kornfeld and Preminger, 2015, provide an alternate approach to nominative case based on evidence from Saha, in which nominative case is just caselessness. So I want to assume that all cases assigned configurationally in this talk, and even genitive case. So genitive case, even in Turkish and Saha, is an unmarked case. So in Turkish and Saha, this genitive case assigned to any NP in an NP, this is what is going to assign genitive case in Turkish and Saha, and all the Turkic languages as well. And it's not assigned via agreement. That's what I'm going to argue. And crucially, if it is an unmarked case, then agreement is going to have to take place after case assignment, not before. So that's what Chomsky and the other Baker say it takes before. For genitive case, I'm going to say that it takes place after. So here are my 4 arguments, empirical arguments, that lay the foundation of this talk. There are cases of default agreement in Turkish where genitive case is still assigned, even though there's no 5-feature agreement. That might be the most important one. Second, agreement patterns on some Turkic relative clauses. So like Uzbek, Saha, and Altai, contradict Baker and Vinokorova's account. Agreement in relative clauses can assign nominative case as well, and not just genitive case, which undermines Baker's account of genitive case assignment in Saha. Third, nominal agreement is present with a bare nominative pronoun in partitive constructions. So constructions like Bizi ikimiz, meaning the 2 of us. Finally, Turkish possessive structures like Deniz'in kedi, which I guess is acceptable to you guys, can have genitive case marked adjunct without agreement. So here are the 3 basic kinds. Well, there's 2 in the slide, but the 3 basic kinds of possessive structures in Turkish. So this is like the most common one. Kedinin resmi, the cat's picture. This is called a genitive possessive construction. So that's just the possessive structure that we've been talking about throughout this talk so far. But Turkish also has another one. So the possessive compounds like tavuk eti, chicken meat. I think these are also called izafet constructions in the literature, if I remember correctly. And there's another third type in which agreement can sometimes be dropped from these gender possessive structures. So bizim kedi or denizin kedi. So based on this, Öztürk and Taylan, 2015, reject that the possessive suffix is an indicator of agreement. It's instead an indicator of whether the genitive case marked NP is an argument or it's an adjunct. So what they're saying is in denizin kedi, the possessor is in fact an adjunct, not an argument. So far, so good, because there doesn't seem to be any difference in meaning between bizim kedi and bizim kedimiz. But there are cases in which the difference is visible. So whether or not agreement can be dropped depends on the semantic relation between the possessor and the possessum. So it can't be dropped from the inherently relational head nouns. So like annemin hala, makalenin isim, binanın yıkım. So these are all really bad, but there is one judgment that I think wasn't so clear in the literature. I guess I can ask you guys that maybe after the talk, but regardless, I think we can all agree that 17 to 19 are bad. And this is very difficult to account for under Baker's approach to Turkish. Well, he does extend the approach in Saha to Turkish in his 2015 book. Regardless of whether or not adjuncts are late merged, they can get genitive case marked without agreement. And so what's going on here is that how on earth are you going to assign genitive case to this guy if you don't have any agreement here, right? Seems impossible. If it's agreement that assigns that, if it's genitive case is what is parasitic on agreement. So if it's agreement that assigns genitive case, then how on earth are you going to assign genitive case without agreement? It just seems impossible, right? So one could claim, so Baker could say that the only way out of this that I see is that agreement in PFGs is a case of default agreement, which arises due to the failure of the probe on the head noun to agree with the adjunct. So like the agreement here could in fact be default. And so this has already been assigned genitive case by the default agreement. Unfortunately, this doesn't really work because Turkish already exhibits default agreement, and default agreement is not seen on the non-possessive free genitives that we have here. So now let's look at default agreement in Turkish. But I would hope that this is clear so far. It's not really unclear how you would assign genitive case without agreement under Baker's approach. So moving on to the second argument is default agreement. And I forget what I have the Turkish term here. Oh, varsayılamıyor. So the Turkic languages often have a phenomenon called default agreement, also known as varsayılamıyor in Turkish, in which case is assigned despite a lack of agreement. So Atakan İnce, 2008, I think was the first to note this in an unpublished short paper. I think Özgür Aydın, who I believe is in Ankara University, also notes this. But default agreement is seen in Turkish with partitive subjects. So like the two of us, all of us, and the nominal pronouns, we linguists, we Turks. And the thing in common between all of the things that default agreement, that we see default agreement with, the possessors that lead to default agreement, is that they're all complex. You never get them with simple pronouns or proper names. So like the two of us is cat, ikimizin kedisi. Even though this has, it can be demonstrated that this has first person plural features. The feature that's on the possessum is third person singular, and that doesn't match up. Our features don't match up. What's interesting is that you can't have first person plural features on the head noun. So you can't say ikimizin kedimiz. Indicating that it seems like the genitive case is what's responsible for blocking the agreement on the head noun. So it seems that part of subjects contain a null pronoun with 5 features. Whether or not you make it overt, visible, it makes no difference in the agreement patterns. So like, biz ikimizin kedisi, that's totally fine. Biz ikimizin kedimiz is still really, really awful. And I would hope that everyone in this talk agrees with me that 23 is really, really awful. So first of all, the first argument, the first problem for Baker is that the pronoun in the part of subject construction, so biz ikimiz, is not that it is not assigned genitive case is unexpected in Baker's approach. So for Baker, D0 would assign genitive case. So like this should actually be bizim ikimiz and not biz ikimiz. Bizim ikimiz is pretty bad, right? But so this is just not possible to drive under Baker's approach. And it's a problem for him. I'm not sure how he would handle that. So I think I've neglected to mention here, or maybe it'll come up later in the talk, I forget, but I should probably still mention this just in case. So biz ikimiz geldik. That's completely fine, right? The possibility of this indicates that the first person, so this guy has first person plural features, so you have first person plural features on the verb here. The two of us came. And this indicates that the 5 features of the part of the construction are first person plural. So the part of construction does have first person plural features. It does have 5 features, but it just cannot be replicated on the head noun when genitive case is present. You can get it with nominative case, but not genitive case. So why is that? Similarly, biz ikimiz geldik. İkimiz geldik. Also fine. This is really bad. İkimiz geldi. There are cases in which you could force something like ikimiz geldi. And we'll talk about that today. But if you just like think of it without just in a normal context, it's not so good, right? We'll talk more about this in a minute though. So moving on. So the Turkic languages are very well known in literature for having many structures in which genitive case is assigned that aren't possessive structures. So default agreement, and this default agreement also happens in other contexts in which genitive case is assigned as well. So ikimizin yediği döner, the döner the two of us ate, completely fine. There's default agreement here, third person singular agreement here on the noun of the relative clause. And you cannot have first person plural agreement on the noun. You need to have default agreement. You can't have full agreement. By the way, constructions like 25 and so ikimizin yediğimiz döner and biz ikimizin kedimiz or ikimizin kedimiz, that's actually totally fine in most other Turkic languages. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So my examples were mainly from partitive subjects, but it also happens with what I call adnominal pronouns. So like biz Türklerin kedisi, totally fine, right? Biz Türklerin kedimiz, it's really awful. I would hope that you guys agree with me on this. That's really bad. Also with reflexives and inflective pronouns, biz kendimizin kedisi. Let's stick to kendimizin kedisi. It's quite a bit better without the pronoun being overt, I think. Similarly, sizlerin kedisi. That's also good. But I want to point out here that I think this is probably just like a hidden adnominal pronoun construction. I think it probably is something like you people, and where the people is just not overt. but I won't be talking more about that in detail today. Oh yeah, I have it here, good. So in finite clauses, default agreement isn't an option. I mentioned this before. So you need to have full agreement. So tam uyum and not default agreement. So varsayılan uyum, that's out. So biz ikimiz geldik or ikimiz geldik and not ikimiz geldi or biz ikimiz geldi. It's not good. But there is a case in which Özgür Aydın, I think, notes that it's okay, and we'll talk more about that shortly. So the pattern is that verbal agreement leads to full agreement and nominal agreement leads to default agreement. Here's a way to make this paradigm a bit more revealing. So nominative case leads to full agreement and genitive case leads to default agreement with a complex possessor. So the complex possessors are the things that we talked about earlier: partitive subjects, adnominal pronouns, reflexives, and what was the last one? Oh yeah, inflected pronouns. Those four guys. Okay, so complexity plus case plus genitive case, default agreement. Complexity plus nominative case isn't enough to get default agreement. You still need to have full. So as I mentioned before, Özgür Aydın notes in some finite clauses it's optional. I think he says in finite clauses it's optional, period. So like, I guess even ikimiz geldi would be okay under Özgür Aydın's approach, but I don't think that's natural. And I have talked to many Turkish speakers who don't like 30 at all. İkimiz geldi is quite bad. But it's actually okay in this context. So let's try to figure out what's going on here. 8 kişi paintball'a gitmiştik ve sadece ikimiz daha önce oynamıştık. Seems okay, right? Well, I pronounced that with the agreement marker, with this, the first person agreement marker. So let me do it without. 8 kişi paintball'a gitmiştik ve sadece ikimiz daha önce oynamıştı. What do you guys think of that? It's okay? Yeah, it is okay. And what's going on here is probably this weird guy right here. The sadece is probably has something to do with that. So how about this? Sadece ikimiz geldi. How is this? It's a bit better, right? I think what's going on with Aydın's example is that sadece leads to this kind of default agreement can be contextually influenced. So I think what's going on here is that there's contrastive focus. Agreement is optionally full or default with focus. Unfortunately, I don't have a very strong solution for this. I just wanted to note what seems to be the empirical pattern here in this talk. It's an interesting observation. Now, moving on, I've talked about Turkish so far, and I want to talk more about the other Turkic languages as well. So Turkish is actually weird in a good way. So default agreement in Turkish is necessary in all contexts with the genitive case marking. But in every other Turkic language in my sample, apart from Uzbek, default agreement is possible, but optional, not required. So in Two of Us's book, so in Saha, for example, ikiye mit ahata or ikiye mit arbet, either or is fine. So this is basically like saying ikimizin kedisi and ikimizin kedimiz are both fine in the other in these Turkic languages. In Turkish, of course, you can't say ikimizin kedimiz. And I believe this is also the case in Uyghur and Kazakh as well. And so this carries on to the relative clauses of these languages, so the other constructions in which genitive case is assigned. So in these relative clauses from Altai, Saha, and Kyrgyz, genitive case marking is also optionally leads to full or default agreement. So the book the two of us read, the head noun and the relative clauses in these languages can have either full agreement or default agreement. Either or is fine. And I'll talk more about these relative clauses later in the presentation. But for now, I just want to show you guys that default agreement is optional in these languages. And like Turkish, so full agreement is required in the finite clauses of these languages. So the two of us came, ikimiz geldik. You can only say ikimiz geldik in Altay. This is one of those languages where default agreement is optional with genitive case. You can never say ikimiz geldi. It's quite bad. So Uzbek stands out. So I talked to 3 native speakers of Uzbek, and they all said that you can't get default agreements at all. So that makes it unique compared to the Turkic languages I've looked at. You can't say ikimizin kedisi. You have to say ikimizin kedimiz. So I have the examples of the two of us' book here. İkimizin kitabı. Basically, you have to say ikimizin kitabımız, which sounds awful in Turkish, but that's what they say in Uzbek. So I've talked about the Turkic languages thus far, but I just want to note here that default agreement isn't a phenomenon that's unique to the Turkic languages. You can also get it in Finnish and Hungarian. So let's briefly talk about Finnish and Hungarian. So in Finnish, for example, your opinions in a generic construction like this, you have genitive case on the possessor, and then you have on the head noun, you have the second person plural agreement marking. It's just like Turkish. But when you have an adnominal pronoun, like you children's opinions, so ignore the genitive case here. I think Finnish has genitive case percolation. Let's put that aside. Let's just look here. So we have genitive case on you children. And what's going on here is that you can't have full agreement on the head noun. You can only have third person singular, just like Turkish. The agreement is in default. So it's not unique to Turkish. There are probably a lot of other languages like this too. The particularly strong evidence in favor of genitive case blocking agreement is seen in Hungarian. So Hungarian allows 2 kinds of possessive constructions. One in which the possessor is morphologically unmarked and the possessor follows a definite article, and another in which the possessor is dative marked and preceded. So what's going on here is that we have a definite article here. I know for you native Turkish speakers, it might be a little hard because we don't have definite articles in Turkish, right? But what's going on here is that there's the possessor you here doesn't have any case markings, and there's agreement on the head noun, full fly agreement on the head noun in the possessive structure. And there's another construction in which the possessor is dative marked and precedes the definite article. So to put this aside, like you can just ignore the definite article if you want. What's going on here is that the dative form of you, the possessor, when you have dative, you can also have dative case marking on it. So Hungarian doesn't have true genitive case, I think, although some people have challenged that in the literature, I think. So in this case, you still have second person plural full fly agreement on the head noun because the pronoun is simple, even though it has dative case marking. But what happens if the possessor is complex is pretty cool. So moving on. What happens is that dative case marking blocks agreement with adnominal pronouns. So these adnominal pronouns are the things that are complex. So it's only you children's opinion that influences our decision. So you children here has dative case marking. And it's complex as an adnominal pronoun construction. What happens here is that you can no longer have the possessive suffix here. You can only have default agreement. Just that's very similar to Turkish, but instead of genitive case in Turkish, it's with dative case. So to conclude, the evidence that case can block agreement together with a complex pronoun like an adnominal pronoun or plotted construction, the evidence seems quite strong. A case can block agreement. So here's a summary of the languages I've looked into so far before concluding on this argument. So default agreement is required with genitive case in Turkish, Finnish, and Hungarian. It's optional with genitive case in Saha, Kyrgyz, Kazakh, Uyghur, and Altai. And default agreement is banned with genitive case in Uzbek. So why does this matter? Why did I go through the trouble of talking about all this? So recall that Baker's argument was phi agreement is necessary for genitive and nominative case to be assigned. But you can get genitive case with default agreement. So default agreement implies that phi agreement isn't necessary, yet genitive case can still be assigned. And how is that possible if case is parasitic on agreements? If you assign case via agreement, how is any of this possible at all? Seems very difficult to derive, right? Okay. So that's it for this argument, and I'll be moving on to the final argument now. So I've been trying to expand the cross Turkic, I don't even know if that's a word, work on relative clauses. So Kornfeld, 2005, this describes 3 types of Turkic relative clauses, and I've tried to extend this to like 5 or maybe even 6 more types of relative clauses, of non-subject relative clauses, I should add. So in type 1, these are the kinds of relative clauses that we have in Turkish. So they're right-headed, subject of the modifier clause in genitive case, nominal agreement on the predicate of the modifier. So the agreement is null in the verbal paradigm. So Turkish is an example. So the Deniz'in yediği tavuk döner, the chicken döner deniz ate. That's an example. That's a classic example of a relative clause here. So the so-called possessor has genitive case marking, and there's nominal agreement on the predicate of the modifier. Okay, and if you can't tell from this example how much I miss Turkish food, it should be obvious that I really, really miss Turkish food. Anyways, so that's the Turkish type appears to actually be quite rare. So in Old Turkic, for example, Uzbek, Azeri, Kyrgyz, and Uyghur, they have a different type of relative clause. So the subject is in the nominative, and there's no agreement at all. So like the book Aitmatov wrote, there's just no genitive case on it. It's in the nominative or bare, and there's no agreement whatsoever on the head noun. It's just totally empty. No agreement, no case, nothing. So the third type is a right-headed one. So there's a third type seen in Kyrgyz, Uzbek, Uyghur, and Saha, in which the relative clause is right-headed. The subject of the modifier clause in genitive case is in genitive case, and the overt agreement is visible on the head noun. So some of the languages which have type 2, the Turkic languages which have type 2 also have type 3. I don't know if there's a semantic difference. I think someone argued that there's a semantic difference between these two. Regardless, you can also, if you want, you can put the genitive case marker on the modifier of the relative clause, but that has to go together with the agreement. So the pattern is this. If you have genitive case, you need to have agreement on the head noun. The pattern so far, I should say, this is going to be contradicted. And if you have nominative case, no agreement on the head noun. Okay. But going back to Turkish really quickly, this is also the case in Turkish. So if you have genitive case on the modifier, you need to have agreement on the head noun as well, similar to Turkish. But this is going to be contradicted, as we'll see. Whoops. I need to get rid of that little line. Okay. So the first problem for Baker is going to come from Saha relative clauses. So for Baker, in Turkish and Saha, T0 assigns genitive case via agreement, while T0 assigns nominative case. So if you have genitive case, you need to have nominal agreement. And if you have nominative case, you need to have normal agreement. And this is all stable thus far. So nothing contradicts Baker here in these cases. But there's going to be a problem with Saha, as we'll see now. So Saha genitive case is well known for being weird. It's syncretic with nominative case almost all the time. So for those of you who don't know this already, here's a really cool piece of Turkic, a very weird Turkic language, which doesn't have genitive case, or doesn't seem to have genitive case. So Julus's father, Julus'un babası, it would be in Turkish. So in Saha, you would say Julus babası, basically. And this is seen in 61. So the only case in which genitive case marker appears in Saha, the only case in which the genitive case seems to exist in Saha is after a third person possessive suffix. So on the possessor of a possessor. So based on this, I don't think I have any examples of, oh, I have it here. Probably should have put this on beforehand. So Julus's father's father, there's a typo here. So Julus's father's father here, this guy shows up right here after the third person possessive suffix. So Julus's father's, let me fix that. Okay, so this is the only case in which the genitive case shows up, and it shows up on the noun that's in the middle. So genitive case marker shows up right here. The genitive case marking isn't optional. So you can't say Julus ata. You have to say Julus atın ata in Saha. So we might say that D0 can assign only genitive case in Saha. I'm going to go back to the slide before now. So it's been claimed by many authors that the genitive case in Saha doesn't exist. But in my view, the default agreement phenomenon that we talked about just before is evidence that the genitive case in Saha is present, but it's just merely visible. So the two of us as fathers, so iki mit ata, that's fine, as I mentioned before, in Saha, and iki mit abit is also fine in Saha. And how would this be possible at all if there wasn't genitive case present here, but merely invisible? So the empty set symbol here. I think that the genitive case marking is optionally present here, just like the other languages in which default agreement is optional, like Altai. That there has to be something that leads to default agreement here. So I think the genitive case in Saha does exist, even in simple constructions like these. Now, moving on. So Baker, 2010, I think to his disadvantage, notes that in Saha relative clauses, the genitive case marking is always optional. So the horse Julus's father ate, they like to eat horses, where they speak Saha, by the way. And so Julus ata siyebit ata and Julus atın siyebit ata are both fine. So one way to understand this data is to say that you can either have genitive case on Julus's father, or you don't, or you can just not have genitive case at all. In which case, I think it would be fair to say that this is actually the nominative. So I'm gonna write nominative here, and then the genitive here. Baker, though, he's a little, he doesn't want to say that it's nominative. He just says in a footnote that it's just a superficial morphological fact. It's meaningless, doesn't matter. But it's because he doesn't want to admit it, because if it was nominative case that is present, nominative case that's present on 65, that would be a problem for him. Because if it's nominative case that is optionally assigned, that would contradict Baker's claim that you D0, so you can only have nominal agreement with genitive case in Saha. So he doesn't want to admit that. But let's see. So can we find independent evidence that this optionality of genitive case marking in Saha relative clauses? That's a long grammatical sentence in English, but anyways, so can we find independent evidence that, so can we find evidence in another Turkic language which behaves just like this, which optionally has nominative case marking or genitive case marking on the possessor in a relative clause? The answer seems to be yes. In Uzbek, genitive case marking is completely optional with agreement on the head noun, just like Saha. to the person I saw. You can just, the agreement here has to be present. And you can have either, you can get rid of the genitive case marking if you want, or you can have you can have it in nominative case form as well. Either or is fine. You can get rid of the genitive case marking if you want. So I think Baker isn't right here. I don't think it's merely a superficial morphological fact. I think it's an important morphological fact. And I believe that this gives us enough reason to add a fourth type of relative clause to Kornfeld's list, one in which agreement is present on the head noun, and the subject of the relative clause is nominative. So type 4. I think we have enough reason to add that to her survey. And here's some reason to add 2 more. Well, 1 more at least. So Altay, another Siberian Turkic language like Saha, is interesting because it seems to have it has been reported to have a 5th type. So Altay, so Kornfeld 2006 notes that Altay has unique agreement patterns and relative clauses, although she didn't give any examples and left it open to future fieldwork. So I had to look through the literature and find it myself. Altay has at least 3 kinds of types of relative clauses. It has all of the types that Kornfeld noted. So it has a Turkish type and the other 2. So the Turkish type is right here. The picture I drew, type 1. So these are examples from, so these examples are mine, and this example is from Scribnik, 1986. It also allows another type of relative clause, which wasn't covered by Kornfeld 2006. So in this one, the subject of the relative clause has nominative case, and the agreement is present on the predicate of the relative clause, which I would call this type 5. So this is like Turkish. So let me write down the example here. Deniz'in yediği tavuk döner. Oh, these examples are making me hungry. But anyways, so what you would say in Altay is Deniz yediği tavuk döner. This seems to be possible in some dialects of Altay. And the fact that Altay allows both genitive and nominative case with the same agreement, type 1 and so type, oh yeah, so Altay allows both type 1 and type 5. That's a problem for Baker because once again, it seems like you can have nominative case. So this guy's in nominative case with full agreement on the verbal noun, I should say. That's a problem for Baker because he wants to draw a neat picture in which nouns assign genitive case with full agreement. So it seems like nouns can also assign nominative case. It's a problem. What we would expect is that in Altay, you can't have a nominative possessor in a possessive structure. So you can't say like, ben kedim, something like that in Altay. And that's borne out. So you can't say ben biçigi, my book, or ben kitabım. You can only say benim kitabım in Altay, just like Turkish. Okay. So the problem is this. Baker tries to draw a neat picture of Turkish and Saha in which nominal agreement is always responsible for genitive case and verbal agreement is always responsible for nominative case. But even in Saha, this isn't the case, no pun intended. And when we try to expand his analysis to other Turkic languages, it just doesn't work at all. So the prediction one would make, well, the prediction I would make, I made this in an earlier draft of the paper, and it seems like my prediction has been confirmed since then, that certain Turkic languages may allow a type 6 relative clause, genitive case with no agreement whatsoever, because I want to say that Baker's neat picture of Saha, in which you always get genitive case with nominal agreements, that's false. I want to say that you can get genitive case with any kind of agreement. Lack of agreement or full agreement is fine. I also want to say that I have shown that you can get nominative case with either the lack of agreement or full agreement. I want to say that Baker's neat picture is false, that there is no correlation to be drawn here. Baker's correlation that he tries to draw is false. So the prediction based on this is that certain type Turkic languages may allow a sixth type of relative clause, so genitive case with no agreement whatsoever. And what's cool is that my prediction seems to be borne out in Kazakh. So I got this example from a recent Turkic 2+5 proceedings paper. So I'm not going to be able to pronounce that name, unfortunately, but she notes that in Kazakh relative clauses, that agreement can be dropped. This is unlike all the Turkic languages we've seen thus far. So according to her, this may be a general pattern. So a new oblast was established in the Kazakhstan where we've been living since we were born. So what's going on in this example is that there's genitive case on the possessor in the relative clause. Agreement is merely optional. The genitive case marking is not, I think. You can have, the point is that you can have genitive case marking without agreement. And this is a problem for Baker because there's no, you can't draw a neat picture that you always get genitive case marking with nominal agreement. You can get genitive case marking without nominal agreement as well. Okay. I think that concludes the arguments that I made in this talk. So, although the Turkic languages are often seen as evidence for Chomsky and Baker's arguments for agreement conditioning the assignment of case, it's very difficult to maintain this, in my view, in light of the arguments I've presented here. There seems to be more evidence for assignment of case and agreement the opposite way. In other words, it's genitive case that conditions the presence of agreement and not agreement that conditions the presence of genitive case. And I presented 4 arguments in favor of my claim. So there's a lot more technical details here that I haven't gotten into of how to derive these patterns because I wanted this talk to be accessible to people who may just be like beginning students and linguists. I won't be getting into, I haven't gotten into those technical details at all. And I refer you to my manuscript if you want to look into those technical details. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for your in-depth great presentation. And if you have any questions regarding the research, you can ask them. Yeah.
I would prefer the question be in English unless it's a really simple, by the way, if that's okay.
Okay. You can unmute yourself and ask Hocam.
Thank you, Deniz. Thanks for the talk. I have a few questions and maybe a couple comments. One of the things that is kind of striking to me is the analysis of biz ikimiz in some of the instructions that you're dealing with. I think, especially in those cases where you don't have the overt pronoun biz, and you just have ikimiz, and then you have a bunch of examples where it looks like agreement on the clausal side might be optional-ish. So in those like paintball cases, so on and so forth. Yeah, and then you had like a contrast of focus example where it looked like things are looking better. So I think what this shows to my mind is that the expression ikim is potentially ambiguous between a partitive reading where you really that makes sense for the contrastive reading, obviously. Yep. And the way the participes are constructed are essentially genitive possessive constructions of some sort. And the other reading, which I can't fully formulate because I don't use them in my daily language, but essentially the difference between the two of you versus, or the two of us versus we two. And in those kinds of constructions, I think there is no genitive possessive construction, and ikim is essentially some form of an adjunct or a floating quantifier even. You can actually try a bunch of other quantifiers there too. So you can try hepimiz, üçümüz, so on and so forth, except for birimiz, I think, which forces a partitive reading to my mind at this time of the day. So worth double checking it again. So I think there might be something to look in there.
Yeah, there definitely
because
is.
it's two different structures.
Yeah, there definitely is more to look into here. I've had multiple comments from people who, I think there's one person actually investigating the semantic difference between when you do get, so cases like this where there seems to be a semantic difference where when you do get the default agreement and when you don't get default agreement, when you get full agreement. So there's definitely much more to say regarding that. In the most recent draft in my manuscript, I acknowledge that and just leave it to future research because I admit there's a lot more to say here. But yeah.
I'm not super clear. Sorry, I'm not super clear, but as I was thinking about this, like as you were presenting, I thought maybe they're still somewhat similar, but in terms of syntactic structure, though I'm not sure. I think they are probably different. But one of the things that came to my mind was that maybe the subtle difference that we're getting between these like ikimiz constructions, where one of the readings is essentially something like a participle and the other one is not, might actually be correlated with the subset or proper subset relations. So I think with ikimiz, you essentially have a subset where the subset could essentially be equal to the number that you're.
I see.
Really, it's like only the two of us and both of us are here kind of construction, whereas the other one might be a proper subset, but don't quote me on that. So
yes, I think someone suggested a very similar idea to me actually. Now that I remember. So maybe maybe there's a semantic difference between, and maybe there's the semantic difference is what leads to the agreement difference here. One concern I have with that is that it seems mysterious as to how semantics can influence agreement in Turkish, because, like, sizin kediniz, for example, even the polite pronouns in Turkish force syntactic agreement, even though this is semantically not second person plural. It's only syntactically second person plural, and it seems it forces syntactic agreement. So I'm not sure how semantics could ever play a role in Turkish agreement, but definitely something to keep in mind. Maybe it's much more. Maybe it's not merely syntactic agreement that's going on in Turkish. I don't know. It seems very complex to me.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting a semantic view per se, honestly. I don't see how semantics plays a role either, but there are those cases where you have like coordination where it looks like obviously there's some number calculus going in the background. So Ayşe ve ben geldik, neither of the arguments are plural, right? I'm sure there's some syntactic operation going on in the background that feeds agreement and then also feeds semantics as well, but worth thinking about. I have a bunch of other questions, but I don't know if there's any other questions in the audience. So I'll
Thanks. That was a good question. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions to ask? If not, you can continue. And also, you mentioned that people have different judgments on some data.
There was one.
You were going to ask us that.
Yeah, there was one thing. The one thing that I didn't agree with Öztürk and Taylan on, right here. So çocuğun burnu. Çocuğun burun. What do you guys think about? Çocuğun burun. The child's nose.
I think it's acceptable in certain contexts for me.
Yeah. Çocuğun burun. Yeah. I don't remember what exactly the point is. I remembered that there was something that I didn't agree with their judgments, but I think it was this, but I can't remember what the point I was trying to make is. Yeah, I can't remember. But do you guys think that this is good? Çocuğun burun. I
I
think
think it is in some informal context, it is acceptable.
I think if çocuğun burun is possible, I think the problem was that it would contradict their semantics, actually. So that would be bad for them. But anyways, we don't have to worry about that. Any other questions?
Okay. I think you can continue, hocam.
All right, here's a question that is challenging to my mind. Maybe you could give me an answer that would let me sleep well tonight. Why don't you assign, well, what is unmarked case, and why does it not get assigned to the head noun?
So that's what, I think that's basically what Gribanova suggests in her, she gave a presentation at ConCall, a Turkic conference. That's basically what she said. So she said that you can assign unmarked case, and basically so D0 can assign either nominative or genitive case. Okay. But it depends on where it's located. So where the thing that is assigned case is located. So if the NP is located inside the verbal domain, so like a proper clause or something like that. It's like if it's in like a little VP, then it would be assigned nominative. If it's located inside the somewhere inside the extended nominal projection, it would be assigned genitive case. But either way, these are always assigned unmarked case. Is that what you're getting at, I think?
No, I'm curious about the lack of genitive on the head noun in a genitive possessive construction on the possessee.
The lack of genitive. Oh, let's see. Oh yeah, I think you're talking about like Bizi kimiz. This one?
Anything really. Ayşe'nin kedinisi. Why does the cat get?
Kedinisi.
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah.
I mean, what would?
Yeah. Why does the possessor get the genitive case, but the possessed noun phrase does not?
I'm not sure that's a problem, because so that just depends on a definition of unmarked case, right? So,
correct. That's what I'm after.
Yeah. So if it's located, so if the NP is located inside the specifier position in the extended nominal projection, then it's assigned genitive case. So because this is a head, because kedi is a head, it's just not part of the unmarked case calculus. That would be it, I think.
So in this particular case, the unmarked case is really about particular types of items in particular types of positions.
Yeah, precisely. So that's all. That just is Maratz's approach. So case assignment is contextual. So even dependent case, for example, depends on where an NP is located with regard to other NPs. So subjects are assigned nominative, objects, not subjects. So the object is assigned accusative because there's a subject somewhere that's inside the tree. And
I'm quite familiar with the dependent case. I think there's a bit of a sloppiness in the distinction between unmarked case and default case. And I've been after that for a long time, trying to see if anybody gets to formalize it.
Yeah, you can. I think you can. So it's hard. I do talk about this in the newer version of my manuscript. So the default case in Turkish appears to be nominative. So like kim geldi? Ben. That seems like nominative, but in English, there is a distinction between unmarked case, if English even has unmarked case, and default case. So who came? Me. The default case in English appears to be accusative. It might, so that's some reason to distinguish between unmarked case and default case. But
yeah, well, I could argue that that's a hanging topic sitting in some specs topic position, and so it's unmarked case.
Yeah, but then you'd have to motivate an analysis like that.
Sure.
You can, I guess, for the purpose of this talk, I think you might be able to subsume unmarked case and default case. That would be fine, I think. I don't see any issues with that. One place that might actually be an issue. So Bizi kim is. So clearly we want to say that Bizi kim is an NP, right? So Bizi kim is NP. What seems to be the case is that this biz has default case. So like not nominative case, because I guess that's a default in Turkish. How is this assigned case at all in the part of construction? I don't really know. What is clear though is that it's not assigned genitive case, and that's mysterious. It's easier to account for that under my approach than under Baker's though, because the fact that this agreement is present here predicts immediately that you need to assign genitive case here, but you can't do so here. One possibility I think I'm leaning towards is that this is assigned default case, default nominative case, like because Turkish has default nominative case. So as I demonstrated before, kim geldi, ben. Yeah, I know it's a hard question to answer.
Last one, if I may.
Please continue.
How would you explain the difference of behavior? So, okay, case is assigned first, then agreement comes in, does its magic and tries to get whatever it can. This works inside the DP. So essentially a genitive mark noun phrase can be agreed with, something that is inside the DP, but it can't agree with something inside the clause, at least in certain cases, right? Why would that be?
The question is why is
how would you account for the difference, or are you even attempting to account for that difference?
So what difference exactly? Can you repeat that?
So bizim kedimiz
Yeah.
geldim, right? So
that.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that is going into the technical details of the technical details part, and there is a way to account for that, but it involves phases and stuff, like a double phase construction, something like that. I have to refer you to my manuscript, but I do have a discussion of that problem. Yeah, it's an important problem. I think I can do it. It's on LinkBuzz, by the way, if you want to.
Oh, I read your manuscript before, so.
Oh, good. Oh, it's outdated though, I think.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I gotta go read it again. All right.
I don't know if I updated it on LinkBuzz yet, but I can email you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. That's all by me.
Okay. Thank you for your comments and your questions, does anybody else have any questions? And if not, I will be closing the session. First of all, I really thank you for accepting our invitation and giving your talk here. It means a lot for us. I think there's no more questions. So thank you everyone for being among the audience here tonight and this morning for you. And thank everyone, and this will be all for tonight, I guess. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Take good care of yourselves. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.